Hi there, my name is Ron Rogers, and I'm going to tell you about flight testing the Airbus 319. Now, this is kind of an interesting situation because this was back in '95, and at the time, United Airlines was thinking of buying replacement aircraft, and they were trying to decide between 737s, and the Airbus fleet because that already had 320s and stuff like that. And they're looking at a little shorter one. They're thinking about the 319. And this is also during the time when we had the ESOP, the Employee Stock Ownership Program, which was a real, yeah, whatever. Um, Supposedly we're owners, but yeah. Anyway, $500,000 worth of worthless stock I got out of that. But at the time, there was a little more excitement about it, and it was going to be fun and everything. And I'm at a meeting with a bunch of management people and pilots and that. And they're talking about, well, which aircraft do we want to look at? Well, McDonnell Douglas had the MD-90 at the time, and they're going, wait a minute, we got this airplane too. We want to be involved in it. And United was kind of going, yeah, whatever, right? They weren't too interested, but all right, and we'll consider you. Okay, well, I'm at this meeting, and Doug was the chief pilot on the Airbus fleet. And they wanted a management pilot to come over and fly the 319. Well, in the whole group there, I had a 737 type rating. I was flying the 727 as captain. I was not typed on the Airbus aircraft, although I'd flown them a number of times in flight test. And I'd also flown the MD-90 in flight test. So Doug said, well, you're the only one who's got experience in all three of these aircraft. Why don't you go over there and fly it? And I go, okay, that sounds like fun. Now, this was very early in on the program, and it's earlier than they like to typically get people involved in flying the aircraft. In fact, I was the first non-Airbus test pilot to fly the 319, which was kind of cool. And it was only 2 months into a 7-month program, so it was very early in the development of the aircraft. So a lot of the tweaks of the flight control laws now, this is all fly-by-wire and stuff, and they got the boxes, the sex and all this other stuff. But they got to tweak it for each airplane because the 319 was essentially a 12-foot shorter version of the 320. And if you don't notice, typically you see there's only one overwing exit window there, escape hatch. The 320 has two. So if you're walking up the terminal, that's the easiest way to see it. It's not quite so noticeable once you get into the aircraft. But the interesting thing was I was over in Europe anyway. I flew the Dornier 328 prop aircraft on October 23 of 95, and hey, I was right there, and I said, well, I can just hop over to Toulouse. So I went from Munich to Toulouse, and I flew the 319 3 days later on October 26th of 1995. Okay, so of course I do this flight evaluation, I write it up, it goes in the Alpha magazine, and yeah, you're looking at that going, what is that guy? That's not a window. What's he doing there? Well, that is what, for you new pilots, we call a second officer. There was a time in the past when, I'm not talking about the Outer Limits Flight 33, where they had a captain, co-pilot, flight engineer, navigator, and radio operator, where they had 5 people in the cockpit. We had 3. We would have 3. In fact, they tried to put 3 on the 737, which is a whole another issue I talk about. That was a disaster. But anyway, and actually I was a third person on the 737. I'm digressing. See the shirt? Yeah. Well, I'm actually getting some new shirts. You're going to like them. You're going to love them, actually. They're beautiful. But and Tom Wilson was very helpful on one of the designs too. I'll show you. Those are cool. But anyway, I digress. Okay, so very common to have 3 people, and this is probably one of the last times one ever occurred on the cover because these guys were on their way out. Of course, being a 727 captain, I had one. But okay, here I am in the Alpha magazine, and let's see, we're looking at it here. I'm not number 1, 2. Oh, well, I guess they're not as excited about me anymore. I'm second from the bottom there. But anyway, I got the article here, and I'll post a link if you want to download it and read the article. If you didn't save it from 29 years ago, oh man, You're a worse pack rat than me, although I have several copies of it here. But anyway, there's the article. And like I said, you can download it. You don't want to read it here or anything. And look at that very young pilot there sitting in the seat. Now, one of the test pilots I dealt with quite a bit was E.T. Taranowski. We called him E.T. And, of course, when you come over there as a union pilot and you fly their aircraft, like when I flew the 321, they gave you this nice little model of the 321. See, I'm a union pilot who comes over and flies it. Well, I show up, and E.T. has a rather larger model for me, thinking I'm a management person because they asked to send a management person over. Oh, you see this thing? That they called it a sail on the Airbus, not a winglet. They called it a sail. They didn't want to, seem like they're following any other aircraft. You notice it's missing here? Bad cat. The cat chewed off. You can even see teeth marks on my model. That was I was not happy with that cat. He lived a long life, but I was not happy with that. But anyway, I show up, and E.T.'s got this big model, and he's looking at me, and he goes, the first thing he says is, "I know you." And I go, "Of course you know me." And he says, "Are you in management now?" And I go, No, they sent me over." And he goes, "Oh," because they were expecting a management part. And then I explained what an ESOP was, and he had no idea what an ESOP was, but okay, kind of looked. Well, anyway, I'll show you the airplane. So we went out and we flew the aircraft, and it was quite interesting. Like I said, we're very early in the development of the aircraft, so there were a lot of things about the way the aircraft flew that were not how they wanted the final development. And the other thing is something you typically don't want on a demonstration flight, which is kind of what this was they had a mix of engines. They had one engine, the right engine contained a double annular combustor. And as a result, the EGT at idle and the accelerations were different, so it was a little bit weird there. You had to be careful because the engines would come up separately. But it was quite interesting to fly early on in the test program. Now, it was very interesting to see the development of the control laws, and one issue they had was with the pitch response in configuration 3. Now, the Airbus had basically 4 configurations, setting 1, 2, 3, and 4. They made it simple. They didn't go flaps 20, 30, or they didn't have like McDonnell Douglas where you dialed a flap, where you could essentially select any flap setting you wanted, which allowed, a lot of variation. I'm digressing here. But anyway, they had 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we're looking at setting number 3. And for configuration 3, that's slats at 22 degrees and flaps at 20 degrees. So I slowed it in configuration 3, slowed to about 140 knots, and then I set maximum continuous thrust. And now the Airbus flight controls, they're going for flight path stability. Now, normally when you advance power with an underslung engine, it will pitch the nose up. And yeah, they leave a little bit of that in, so it seems like it's got, typical performance. But basically, you don't want the pitch really to change. That's part of the flight path stability that they're going for in their design. And with no pilot input, it pitched up to 4 degrees and gave about 800 foot per minute climb rate. Now, what they wanted was it to pitch up to 3 degrees. That was kind of their goal. And all these things took a little tweak, and of course, you got to adjust flight controls for the flap setting and things like that. Now, we did a number of things that I flew it in direct law, and that's where the pilot directly controls the flight control services, and you have to use manual pitch trim. Speeds limited to 320 knots indicated, 0.77 Mach. The protections are lost, and you have to use the speed brake with care and the rudder with care. Those are the warnings that pitch up. And one thing I looked at in this configuration was the Dutch roll. And basically, we went to configuration 4, which was the highest flap setting. And with both the yaw dampers off, I did a 10-degree steady side slip. And I put the rudder in and then released it. And we got a very nice, well-damped Dutch roll. In about 40 seconds, it finished the Dutch roll. It damped out. And that's without pilot intervention. So it's very well controlled there. Basically, with the odd dampers on, it was deadbeat, which means you put the 10 degrees in, it comes right back to neutral, no overshoots, no, typical Dutch roll, yawing around, stuff like that. So, it's very well contained. Now, then I went to do some landing attitude stalls, and we trimmed to 127 knots, and I maintained back pressure. And of course, to do this, you have to be out of normal law. And they asked me when I was going through training, how do you get into direct law? And I said, well, I usually ask Alonzo to set us in direct law, and they go, no, 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 that's not the right answer. The answer is multiple system failures. Okay, well, that's pretty easy. So anyway, I trimmed to 127 knots, and I increased the pitch to 13.5 degrees angle of attack, and that's where I got the stall warning. And of course, that's where most of the time that people recover. You recover on the first indication of a stall. That's the way they train you and stuff like that. But in flight test, of course, we want to go into the stall to see what the actual characteristics are. So I continued to slow, and I got the stall break at about 99 knots and a angle of attack of 22 degrees. Got just a little bit of airframe buffet, and I got the right wing to drop. And then one thing I did, and this is one thing that's nice about the Airbus. We're back into normal law here. And I set up for a collision escape maneuver. And that's basically where you see, oh my gosh, there's an airplane there. And, most of the time you have to worry about yanking back on the stick. You might stall the aircraft and stuff like that. The nice thing about Airbus, you just pull back on that stick, pull it in the corner, a climbing bank turn. Engines come roaring in. As long as it doesn't think you're landing, that's another story. But the engines come roaring in, and you don't over-G it. You go right to what's known as alpha floor, which is the max performance of the aircraft. And we had an alpha of 6. Doing this maneuver, we had an alpha of 16 degrees angle of attack and a pitch attitude of 21 degrees. We were climbing at 106 knots. Now, anybody who flies transport aircraft knows that 106 knots is kind of a slow speed, but hey, we're fully protected there, and that's kind of cool. And I had a climb rate of about 2,200 feet per minute, which is obviously pretty darn decent. And we flew a few other maneuvers. I came back to shoot a few patterns. I asked to be placed in direct law for landing, and that's where you have to use manual trim. And the aircraft was very controllable. Now, one thing that's kind of interesting, and if you're familiar with the term in vino veritas, in wine is truth. The maximum roll rate in normal law is limited to 15 degrees. Now, and this is a funny thing. If you have a degraded flight control law, you actually increase the roll rate because you go to the natural roll rate of the aircraft, which is around 30 degrees. And the other thing is there's what's known as a tau function, which is how rapidly the aileron's essentially effectiveness ramps up. And you want that to be smooth. When you go into a turn, you want the ailerons to come in nice and smoothly. You want the roll to be smooth. But this aircraft it actually has a very steep function, and you put the SIC in direct law, and you get almost a head banging roll there. It's very effective, and I commented that it's interesting that you get better roll performance in a degraded flight control law, if you will, than you do in normal law. But interesting thing that probably a lot of Airbus pilots don't know is that, okay, the maximum roll rate is set at 15 degrees. It used to be 20 degrees. And they did some flight tests, and they actually got into a very serious lateral pilot-induced oscillation of 60 degrees bank to bank. The guy was trying to control. They brought in some pilots to fly the 320 early on, and of course, airline pilots do things differently than test pilots, and that's where they learn some extra little things that they didn't know about. And this was one of them, that you could excite the pilot-induced oscillation, and they found when you allowed in normal law a roll rate of 20 degrees, you could get into that PIO. So they backed it off to 15. I took a few sessions talking with the Airbus test pilots in some nice restaurants in Toulouse, having a couple glasses of wine, where this kind of came out, and they told me what's known as the rest of the story. So look at that young guy there. My gosh, nice dark blonde hair. So this was the earliest that typically you'll get a demonstration flight in an aircraft because they're trying to sell it to United Airlines at the time, and they wanted to get us over there and flying it. So that was fine. So the whole story is they've got control laws they need to develop and stuff like that. But it gave us a pretty good entry into it, and I wrote up a report and I compared the three aircraft. And basically, my recommendation, and I guess they followed it because they bought the 319. Of course, it wasn't the only input. But anyway, my recommendation was I thought the 319 was a very good fit for this from the pilot standpoint. Of course, there's a lot more things. You look at basically, is the airplane going to serve the market? So, pilots will fly anything. So, but it's probably more the marketing people and all the people, the bean counters who determine, is this aircraft good? But my recommendation was I like the 319, the MD-90. We're not going to start another new fleet. I mean, that was kind of a nice try, McDonnell Douglas, but no, we weren't interested in that. So anyway, that is the story of my adventure flying the 319. It was kind of funny. Or fun to go directly from the Dornier 328 prop over to fly the 319 in Toulouse. And when I was going through customs there, the customs agent asked me, he says, "So how long are you in France?" Because I went through, I entered through customs there in Toulouse, and I said, "I will be here less than 24 hours because I had to get back to fly a trip." So I was there, got to fly the airplane. We went out for a nice little evening meal. The nice thing about this job is I got to see all the really nice restaurants in Toulouse and ate a lot of really cool French food. But I was back on a flight early morning the next day to get back home. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this little story. Thanks for watching. Appreciate it.